'Cause they say death is final. But what they never mention is the moment right before it. The clarity. The sudden, agonizing realization of betrayal. I remember the sound of metal bending like paper. My own breath, slow and labored as the car flipped, scraped and finally collapsed into itself. The scent of engine oil and scorched leather. Blood warm in my mouth. And then click. My dash cam dislodged from the mirror hit the dashboard and flickered to life. It should have recorded the crash. Instead it showed them. Sophie Lane. Sitting on my living room couch. Laughing. My husband, Miles Carter, beside her. Arm draped over her shoulder. Kissing her temple. Smiling. Whispering. It was no accident. They killed me. I died with that image burned into my retinas. And then I woke up. The first thing I noticed was the smell. My office always carried the faint hint of fresh orchids and pine-scented diffusers. The second was the clock. 9:07 a.m. 6 months earlier. I was seated in my executive chair, in the very room I had walked into after returning from a major business trip in Seoul. My orchid plant was still half dead on the windowsill. My tablet was blinking with unread emails. The skyline outside was exactly as it had been that day. I wasn't dreaming. I'd been given a second life. Second chance. This time I wasn't going to die quietly. The knock on the door came at 9:10. Light, almost hesitant. "Ms. West," came a chirpy, overly sweet voice. "I just left the copies on your desk." Copies? I had asked for printed, bound briefs. I turned slowly. There she stood. Sophie Lane. Wide-eyed. Blushing. Dressed in a too-tight blouse that looked like it came from a college clearance bin. The same girl who would one day sabotage my car. "Come in," I said, keeping my voice calm. She bounced in, smiling like she hadn't just booked my death in her last life. "I finished the copies," she said, placing the stack on my desk. "They're all, well, photocopies of what you emailed." I blinked. "I asked you to print the presentation in color, tabbed, bound, and double-sided." She tilted her head. "Oh, well, isn't copying and printing kind of the same?" I stared at her for a long moment. Before I might have sighed. Taken it in stride. Redone it myself. No. I took a slow breath and filed away the first strike in my mental war ledger. By noon she'd misbooked a conference room we needed. Sent the wrong address to our lunch guest. Spilled water on my tablet. Called a potential investor by the wrong name. Twice. Each time she smiled. "I'm still learning." And the men in the office? They just shrugged and smiled back. "She's new, Ariana. Cut her some slack." She wasn't new. She was lethal. The breaking point came 3 days later. I asked Sophie to take my white Mercedes in for its quarterly service. Basic maintenance. Nothing complicated. She returned an hour later, smug and satisfied. "All done. I told them to rush it and save you some cash." I don't know what she told them. But later that night when I was on the freeway heading home, the brakes failed. I slammed them twice. 3 times. Nothing. The car skidded, spun, and crashed into the guardrail with the full weight of betrayal behind it. That was how I died before. This time I managed to swerve just enough to avoid the same fate. And when the car finally stopped, trembling and damaged, I knew it for sure. Sophie Lane had tried again. She was testing the waters. Wondering if she could finish what she started. But I wasn't the same Ariana West. Not anymore. Back at the office the next morning, I watched her from behind my office blinds. She was laughing at something Miles said in the break room. He touched her elbow. She didn't flinch. Her hand lingered on his forearm just a second too long. They were already connected. Already slipping into roles they thought were invisible. But I saw everything now. Every glance. Every lie. And I would let them think they were winning. I would let Sophie believe she had fooled me again. Because the next time she touched my car, I'd be ready. Sophie's footsteps were too light for someone so dangerous. She was humming when she entered the boardroom. A barely their tune, something cheerful and out of place, like she had just skipped through a meadow and not stumbled her way through a pile of professional disasters. I didn't look up right away. Let her get comfortable. She sat at the conference table like she belonged there, flipping through a manila folder, legs crossed just enough to draw glances from the junior analysts beside her. She smiled at one of them. He flushed. I waited until the last person filed in, Marcus, our finance lead, and closed the door behind him. Then I stood. "Sophie, I said clearly, loudly enough for the entire room to hear. You're fired. The room went still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Sophie blinked, lips parting just slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching like she thought she'd misheard. What? She asked, voice pitched high in feigned innocence. You're done here, I said evenly. Pack your things. Now. She stood too quickly. Ms. West. I don't understand. I don't expect you to, I replied. You've consistently failed to follow basic instructions, jeopardized our largest client, and last week, nearly caused my death by sending my car to the wrong mechanic. Whispers rippled across the room. Eyes darted from me to her. Her lower lip quivered and like clockwork tears began to form in the corners of her eyes. I didn't know, I swear, she murmured. I only wanted to help. It was all a misunderstanding. It was your last one, I said flatly. And then came the voice I expected, smooth and sharp. Ariana, can we talk outside? I turned. Miles. My husband, co-founder of West & Carter Consulting, and the man who would have killed me for control of the company, had fate not decided I'd earned a second round. He looked like the image of reason and authority. Expensive suit, tie loosened just enough to seem approachable. But his jaw was tight. His fingers clenched around a ceramic coffee mug like he was imagining breaking it against the table. No, Miles, I said, voice calm level. If you have something to say it here. His eyes narrowed. He glanced at Sophie, who now looked like a child scolded in public, small, tearful, and oh so victim. You can't fire her without going through HR, he said. She's under my direct contract. There was the first real move. I smiled. Then I'll go to HR right now, I said, already stepping toward the door. And after that I'll call legal to revisit the employment clause you clearly bypassed. She's a fresh graduate, he said louder. She needs time. She's still adjusting. She booked a hostel for a client who arrived in a Rolls-Royce. She spilled coffee on $1 million contract. She misfiled our Q3 earnings and almost sent them to a competitor's inbox. It wasn't, Sophie sniffled, reaching out toward Miles. I was trying to help. Quiet, I snapped at her. You've done more than enough damage. Enough, Miles said firmly, stepping between us. Ariana, I'm telling you now. Stop this. I looked at him. And I saw it, the same look he gave her in the dashcam footage. The protective gaze. The subtle lean toward her. He wasn't defending her out of professionalism. He was doing it because he was afraid I'd expose them too soon. And I was done pretending. So I did the thing I'd dreamt of doing since the moment I saw the footage in that dying car. I raised my hand and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a pen. Sophie shrieked. Miles recoiled, hand flying to his cheek, eyes wide with disbelief. How dare you, he hissed. No, I said coldly. How dare you? You bring this parasite into our company, shield her from every consequence, and now act like I'm the irrational one. His mouth opened but no words came out. I straightened my blazer, turned on my heel and walked out of the room without another word. Behind me the office was silent. Perfect. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them know the ice had finally broken. That night I didn't go home. I didn't want to see the place we'd once built together. The kitchen where he used to kiss my forehead. The wine rack we filled while dreaming of retirement in Italy. It was all a lie. Instead, I checked into a hotel under my maiden name and made 2 calls. The first was to Anderson Price, the private investigator I had hired in my last life when I suspected one of our competitors was stealing client data. Discreet. Brilliant. Ruthless. Anderson, I said. I want surveillance. On 2 people. He didn't ask who. He just said, send me their names and habits. I'll handle the rest. The second call was to myself, metaphorically speaking. I opened my journal. The one I had kept locked in a drawer since college. I hadn't written in years. But tonight I scribbled 1 line across the page in bold black ink. If they think I'll die the same way twice, they're not ready for this version of me. At the office the next day I arrived early. Too early. I watched as Miles strolled in 8:45 a.m. sharp, and made his way straight to Sophie's desk. She stood up quickly. Too quickly. They talked in hushed tones. He reached forward to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. She blushed. And just before the office lights fully turned on, I saw him take her hand and kiss it. Disgust twisted in my stomach. But not because he was cheating. Because he was stupid enough to believe I hadn't noticed. That I hadn't seen their patterns. Their glances. Their secret lunches. They thought I was the same Ariana. Trusting, ambitious, loyal to a fault. They were wrong. By noon, Sophie was back at her desk, filing papers and pretending she wasn't crying. HR hadn't approved her firing yet. Miles had stepped in and stalled the process. That was fine. Let her stay. Let them both stay. Because it's easier to bury your enemies when they're standing right in front of you. The first camera I installed was inside the frame of a modern art piece Miles gifted me years ago. Fitting really. It had always been hollow on the inside. By the time Friday rolled around, I had 5 surveillance devices planted in strategic places across the executive floor. 3 in shared spaces, 1 in my office and 1 in his. Miles had changed the passcode to his office weeks ago, thinking I wouldn't notice. Too bad I knew the override code. I wrote the building's system protocols myself. Let him think I was losing power. Let him think I was too emotional to act. In reality, I was watching everything. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I saw it. It was 3:12 p.m. Sophie had just left a client call she nearly butchered, and instead of returning to her desk, she slipped into Miles' office. She closed the door. Locked it. I watched from my phone screen, barely breathing. She leaned against his desk, looking worried. Then she blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Miles froze. The kind of stillness that only comes when someone's been planning for everything but this. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded, eyes brimming with forced innocence. "I took 2 tests. I wasn't going to tell you yet, but I'm scared." Silence. Then slowly he crossed the room and cupped her face in both hands. "Listen to me," he said. "We'll figure this out. But we need to be careful. Ariana's starting to get suspicious." She whimpered. "I don't want to be a homewrecker." "She's already halfway out the door," he cut her off. "Once we handle the board vote on the expansion, I'll talk to her about the divorce. Just, not yet. We can't risk her taking half the company." Sophie smiled through tears and threw her arms around his neck. He kissed her. Long, intimate. And I watched every second. That night I made chamomile tea, applied a cooling sheet mask and watched the footage again. Not because it hurt. Because I needed to feel it. I needed it to fuel me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was insult. He used my money, my name, and my business to build his little empire. And now he wanted to discard me like a used foundation stick. Not this time. The next morning I walked into his office with a smile. "Miles," I said, voice light, "I've been thinking. Maybe I overreacted about Sophie." He blinked, startled. "Really?" I nodded, sitting on the edge of his desk like I used to in the early days. "She's young. Makes mistakes. Maybe I was a little too harsh." He relaxed instantly. That was his weakness. He never saw past the surface. Always underestimated people who chose kindness. "Glad to hear that," he said. "I'll tell HR to delay the decision for now." "Sure," I replied, standing again. Let her prove her worth. He didn't see the knife I was polishing behind my eyes. That afternoon, Victor Hahn cornered me in the hallway outside Conference 7B. "Got a minute?" he asked. Victor was one of our oldest senior managers. Loyal, dependable, sharp. The kind of man who spoke rarely but with purpose. "I just wanted to give you a heads up," he said quietly. "Sophie handled the call with Lang Enterprises this morning. I already knew this. She flirted with the client," he said. Blatantly. Called him handsome, asked if he was into assertive women. It was uncomfortable. I clenched my teeth. "Lang is conservative." "Very," Victor said. He was polite but cold. Said he'd call back. He hasn't. That was the second client Sophie had personally offended in less than 2 weeks. And Miles still called me cruel for trying to fire her? He had no idea. That evening I called Mr. Lang myself. "Miss West," he said. "A pleasure. I was concerned by your assistant." "I apologize," I said. "It was unprofessional. If you give me a chance to make it right, I'll fly to Shanghai tomorrow. I'll handle your concerns personally." There was a pause. Then a sigh. "I appreciate your willingness to fix things. We value our relationship with your firm." I smiled. "I'll take care of everything." And I did. 2 days later, Mr. Lang signed the renewal contract over lunch at a rooftop restaurant. He handed it to me with a tight nod. But I'm only staying because of you. I understand, I said. I won't let it happen again. He tapped the contract once. One condition. I looked up. Fire her. The assistant. Or we walk next year. I held his gaze. Done. Back in my office, I opened the file labeled Project Cleanse. Inside were folders titled Sophie, Surveillance. Miles, Timeline. Prenup Clause 8, Divorce Options. Shareholder Influence Strategy. And finally, Hong Clients, Retention Plan. I smiled to myself as I added a new tab, Pregnancy Watch. Then I wrote in fresh black ink, When betrayal meets preparation, revenge writes itself. Let them play house. Let them name the baby. Let them plan my funeral. As this time I was writing the ending. And neither of them would survive it. The difference between suspicion and proof is silence. Proof is louder. It crashes into a room, strips the curtains off the truth and leaves nowhere to hide. And on Monday morning at 10:04 a.m., I brought the truth into the boardroom with a flash drive and a smile. I had called an emergency executive meeting under the guise of client recovery planning. Everyone shuffled in, still holding coffee cups, unprepared for what was coming. Miles arrived last, looking tired but smug. The kind of smug you wear when you think you've dodged a bullet. Sophie walked in behind him, pretending to review a notepad. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I took my seat at the head of the long table, leaned forward and plugged the flash drive into the monitor on the wall. Without preamble, the screen lit up. Audio began to play. You're very handsome, Mr. Lang. Sophie's voice cooed, saccharine and too sweet. I've always liked men who take charge. Maybe next time I visit Shanghai, you can give me a private tour. There was a faint cough. Then the sound of shifting chairs. Silence. And finally Mr. Lang's clipped voice. This is a business call, Mississippi Lane. The screen went black. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. All eyes turned to Sophie. Her face drained of color. That wasn't. I didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean what? I asked, still calm. Didn't mean to hit on a married client during a contract negotiation? Or didn't mean to cost us an international partner? She was just being friendly, Miles cut in, his voice harder than usual. Lang's always been uptight. Friendly? I echoed. That's your defense? Miles, she turned a client call into a cheap dating app pitch. Victor, sitting beside me, cleared his throat. I can confirm, he said. Lang reached out directly afterward and was not pleased. Said he nearly withdrew the contract. That's ridiculous, Sophie gasped. It was just a compliment. No, Sophie, I said, meeting her eyes. It was another mistake in a long, deliberate pattern of incompetence. And this one nearly burned down an entire account. I didn't know he was married. I tilted my head. Is that the part you're sorry about or the part where you got caught? He turned to Miles. Miles, please. You know I didn't mean anything bad. And he softened. Of course he did. Always the knight to her damsel. Enough, he said. It's over now. Let's just clean it up and move on. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just love or lust or manipulation. It was delusion. He truly believed she was worth losing everything for. I smiled to myself. Even better. After the meeting, I returned to my office and checked the hidden camera footage from earlier that morning. Sophie had entered Miles' office at 8:13 a.m. She cried for exactly 2 minutes. He consoled her, kissed her forehead and muttered something I couldn't quite hear. But then, clear as day. Don't worry. She'll calm down. I'll fix this. Just be patient. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered back. Promise me, you'll really divorce her this time. Miles hesitated, then nodded. That's when the plan began to form. He wouldn't try to negotiate. He wouldn't risk splitting the company. He'd do what he'd already done once before. He'd try to kill me. The first time I never saw it coming. This time I was building the trap myself. That evening Miles came home later than usual. He brought wine. I pretended to sip mine. He finished his. I've been thinking, he said cautiously, about everything that's happened lately. I replied, feigning tiredness. Sophie made mistakes. I admit that. But maybe we've been too hard on her. We? I asked, tilting my head. He chuckled, trying to defuse the tension. I meant you. You've been stressed. Rightfully so. But maybe we shouldn't make decisions emotionally. I leaned back, folded my arms and asked lightly, and what decision is that? She's young. Replaceable, sure. But firing her could send the wrong message to the rest of the staff. There was a diplomatic mask hiding panic. He knew her job was slipping. He was trying to stall. I'll consider it, I said, smiling. He relaxed, unaware that I had just added him to the list of people I would bury before the year was over. The next morning I sent both of our Mercedes in for maintenance. One white, one silver. He didn't even ask why. I told the technician privately to install a GPS tracker in mine, and to record every detail of the service report. Then I did one more thing. I swapped the license plate numbers, just slightly. Same characters, one digit reversed. So when Miles picked up his car next week thinking it was his, he would be driving the trap he rigged for me. I wasn't sure how far he'd go this time. Whether he'd mess with the brakes again or try something subtler. But I knew one thing. He was desperate. And desperate men make fatal mistakes. By Thursday, Sophie had stopped making eye contact with anyone in the office. Her smile faltered. Her nerves frayed. The board was whispering. Clients were asking questions. And I was playing the long game. One press of a pedal at the wrong time. And this time I wouldn't be the one in the wreckage. Miles was humming that morning. Pouring coffee, flipping through the newspaper, pretending he wasn't planning my death for the second time. I sat at the breakfast table in a silk blouse and red lipstick, more alert than I'd ever been. Watching him move like a man who thought he'd already won. You've been driving a lot lately, he said casually, sipping his drink. I should probably take your car in for service. There was the same line he'd used in my previous life. The same tone. So casual, like he cared. Oh right, I said, smiling. And your car's due too, isn't it? Why don't you take them both in? He blinked just briefly. Then nodded. Good idea. He had no idea I'd already prepared the stage. The cars looked identical, white Mercedes-Benzes with nearly matching plates. But inside, one was quietly humming with sabotage, the other untouched. And he had just chosen his own grave. I watched from the window as he drove off. Our housekeeper passed behind me, humming softly as she watered the orchids. I folded my arms. Miles was in the car meant for me. The one he'd sabotaged. The one I let him take. And now all I had to do was wait. The call came just after 2 p.m. Mrs. West, the voice on the line said, urgent and clipped. Your husband's been in a serious accident. He's in critical condition. We need you to come immediately. I gasped, perfectly timed. Oh my God, what? How, what happened? Single vehicle crash. Off the expressway. Witnesses said the car veered uncontrollably before it flipped. He's unconscious and barely responsive. I grabbed my purse and coat, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'm on my way, I whispered. I hung up, then exhaled. Not with grief. With relief. At the hospital, I arrived in heels and perfume, with eyes that looked red from crying, but weren't. Doctors rushed to meet me, explaining his vitals, the swelling in his brain, the uncertainty of recovery. Words like coma and vegetative state floated in the air. I nodded, murmured, thank you, and asked to see him. He looked like a wax figure. Bruised, broken, tubes everywhere. The same man who'd tried to end me. Now limp and powerless. Perfect. Outside the ICU, I found Sophie pacing like a deranged cat. She looked up when she saw me, wild-eyed, unkempt, mascara bleeding into her skin. You, she hissed. What did you do? My brow arched. Excuse me. You set him up. He was driving your car. The one meant for you. I tilted my head. He must have mixed them up. They look so alike, don't they? Her fists clenched. You killed him. I stepped forward slowly. And slapped her. Hard. Across the face. The sound echoed down the corridor. She gasped, hand flying to her cheek, shocked more by the audacity than the pain. How dare you? I said coldly. He wouldn't have been in such a hurry if you hadn't called him nonstop this morning. Maybe you distracted him. Maybe you're the reason he lost control. Her eyes welled with tears again, but not the fake kind this time. These were real. Messy. Desperate. Good. A small crowd had gathered nearby. A few nurses. Security guard. They were watching. And I played my role perfectly. My husband is lying in there because of you, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And you have the audacity to accuse me? Behind me a heavy cough sounded. I turned. Miles' mother, Eleanor, stood at the end of the corridor, pale and trembling. She had arrived just in time to hear everything. She looked between Sophie and me. Is it true? She asked. Was Ryan driving your car? Yes, I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Ask your son, I replied. If he ever wakes up. Eleanor went silent. Then turned to Sophie and slapped her too. Twice as hard. You stupid girl, she shouted. You ruined my son. You ruined everything. Sophie stumbled, wailing. Do you know what you've done? I almost smiled. But I didn't. Not yet. Later, in the hospital lounge, I sat alone watching the rain streak down the windows. Sophie had been removed by security. Eleanor was in the chapel, no doubt cursing every god she could think of. Miles lay unconscious in the ICU, unaware that the war he started had just ended, with him in ruins. Me. I was free. For the first time in my life I was free. That night I lit a single candle in the master bedroom. Not for mourning, but for closure. I had faced death once. This time I delivered it back, gift-wrapped. Let the world think I was grieving. Let Sophie scream and rant. Because Miles Carter, the man who thought I couldn't survive without him, was now just a name on a hospital door. And I was just getting started. There are moments in life when playing the fool becomes your greatest weapon. That morning I dressed in charcoal gray, hair pulled back, lips pale. Grief, after all, had a uniform. And today I needed to wear it well. Miles lay comatose. Sophie frantic. And I had never been more prepared. I arrived at the hospital alone. No bodyguard. No driver. No staff. Just a bouquet of lilies and silence clinging to my heels. I found them, Sophie, Miles' mother Eleanor, and two of our junior staff, all gathered in the obstetrics department. That was my stage. I didn't even need a script. Oh God, I whispered loud enough for heads to turn, this can't be real. Everyone turned. Sophie's smile froze mid-sentence. She was holding her belly like it was made of gold. Eleanor stiffened. I let my bag slip from my shoulder and stumbled forward. Sophie. My voice cracked perfectly. Why are you here? This is OB. The nurse behind the desk looked up, eyebrows raised. Is she here for Miles? I nodded, biting back a fake sob. Yes. My husband. The room went deathly quiet. Sophie flinched. Ariana, don't what? I said louder. Don't ask why my husband's mistress is here with his mother? The word mistress hit the air like a gunshot. Phones rose. Fingers started recording. Eleanor hissed, keep your voice down. But I wasn't here to whisper. I thought Miles ended it with you, I said louder still. Why are you still clinging to him like this? Are you pregnant? Sophie backed away, hand to her stomach. Yes, she breathed. And he was going to leave you. Gasps rippled through the waiting room. One woman, heavily pregnant, muttered, shameless. Another whispered, poor wife. Sophie's eyes darted around, panic blooming. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I snapped. You're a homewrecker with a cheap perfume addiction. And you, I turned to Eleanor, who had turned a shade of mortified red. You knew about this. You encouraged it. Eleanor opened her mouth, but the chorus of disgusted murmurs drowned her out. Disgraceful, someone muttered. Can't believe they'd bring her here. She's the reason her husband's in a coma? Perfect. An hour later, the footage was viral. The hashtags were trending. Hashtag betrayed wife. Hashtag mistress in the maternity ward. Hashtag justice for Ariana. Sophie's name became synonymous with scandal. My image. Tragic. Graceful. Strong. The wife who was betrayed but held her head high. Interviews were requested. I declined all of them. Dignity speaks louder than press releases. That afternoon my assistant slid a file onto my desk. I thought you'd want to see this, she said quietly. Inside, Sophie Lane's full background. And there was the final nail. She had been a recipient of my foundation's scholarship for underprivileged girls. I had paid for her books, her dorm, Her flight to the city. I had lifted her out of the mud. And she repaid me by crawling into my bed after I left it. The headlines doubled overnight when that detail leaked. Sponsored student betrays benefactor. Mistress was wife's charity case. Even the tabloids were sickened. Sophie tried to hide. But social media does not forget. She shut down her profiles. He stopped going to work. She even filed a defamation complaint, but by then no one believed her. Especially not after the miscarriage. I wasn't there when it happened. She was walking down a narrow street alone, swaddled in sunglasses and shame. A stray dog barked and lunged. She tripped. And fell. By the time she was rushed to the ER, it was too late. Not only had she miscarried, but doctors informed her that the trauma had damaged her uterus beyond repair. She would never carry another child. When I heard, I was in the middle of negotiating a recovery deal with Hong Corporation. I didn't flinch. I just sipped my tea. Eleanor came to see me 2 days later. She had aged 10 years in 1 week. I didn't know this would happen, she whispered. You supported her, I said simply. You encouraged your son to cheat. Lied to my face. Watched me welcome her into our office while you planned my exit. She could have given us a grandchild, she snapped. You were always too focused on your career. Career that built your son's empire, I corrected. She had no retort. Just silence. I stood. I owe you nothing, I said. And if you try to drag me down with her, I'll take you down first. She left without another word. That night I stared out over the skyline from my penthouse window. Everything was quiet. My enemy was bleeding. Her womb was empty. Her public image was destroyed. My husband lay in a bed, drooling into a pillow, his mind lost in a storm he created. Me. I was still standing. Taken. Unbothered. Unstoppable. By now I'd learned something about poison. It never screams when it enters your system. It waits. It smiles. And then one day it explodes from beneath your skin. That was Sophie Lane. And the day she finally cracked was beautifully pathetic. It was a Wednesday evening when she came for me. The office parking lot was nearly empty. The sky overhead had darkened to the color of old bruises, and the humidity pressed down like guilt. I walked slowly, heels clicking across the pavement, deliberately alone. But I wasn't unprotected. I saw her coming before she moved. Her shadow slid out from behind the column like an oil stain. She wore a hoodie, her hair a tangled mess. Her eyes were feral. And in her trembling hand, a knife. You ruined everything, she shrieked, lunging toward me. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. My bodyguard, a quiet, silent shadow named Ria, stepped out from the far side of the lot and intercepted her mid-charge. Within seconds, Sophie was face down on the pavement, the blade clattering uselessly out of reach. He screamed, sobbed, cursed, thrashed. I crouched beside her, letting my shadow stretch across her like a funeral veil. You look tired, I said softly. You stole everything, she spat. I didn't steal, I corrected. I took back what was mine. She glared up at me, eyes full of hate, madness, and something even more delicious, desperation. You killed him. You turned him into that, she seethed. You made him hate me. Oh no, Sophie. I smiled. He never loved you in the first place. Back inside the building, in front of security and half the remaining staff, I opened my phone. I thought I'd save this, I said. But tonight feels appropriate. I played the recording aloud. Miles' voice spilled into the hallway, deep and cold. She seduced me. I never cared about her. She's just an idiot. A good distraction. Someone I used to kill time with. Then silence. And then Sophie collapsed. She screamed, sobbed, tried to cover her ears. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard it. Everyone knew. The girl who had clung to Miles as her future now had nothing left to grip. The police arrived minutes later. She was arrested for attempted assault and carried away still screaming my name like a curse. Let her scream. It wouldn't change the fact that she was done. Later that night I sat beside Miles in the hospital room. His face was still. Machines beeped. Tubes hissed. Nurses whispered. I leaned in close. Remember when you told me I was too soft? I whispered. Too naive? That I couldn't survive without you. He didn't answer. Of course not. But I kept going. I survived your affair. Your sabotage. Your attempt to kill me. I outplayed your little mistress. I burned her down publicly. And I watched you drive the car meant for my funeral. I brushed hair off his forehead. And the best part? I didn't have to kill you. I smiled. You did it all to yourself. 2 weeks later, the last of the headlines faded. Hashtag Justice for Ariana. Hashtag The Fall of Sophie Lane. Hashtag Carter Corp Scandal. Sophie's trial was swift. The footage, the recordings, the history, everything stacked against her. She was sentenced without hesitation. Eleanor tried to visit me once more. I didn't open the door. Instead, I sent her a letter, a neatly typed, impersonal message. Dear Eleanor, you once said I wasn't enough for your son, that I was all business and no heart. Now you have no son, and I have everything, or even Ariana. I never heard from her again. At the next shareholder meeting, I walked in alone. No Miles. No distractions. No lipstick-stained interns. Just me. Every chair turned. Every executive stood. Every investor smiled. I had survived scandal. I had restored the firm's image. And now I was expanding us to Hong Kong solo. As I stood at the podium, I felt it. The shift. The crown that had once been shared now sat squarely on my head. And no one dared challenge it. That night I toasted myself. A single glass of vintage red. A quiet rooftop. The city glittering below like the diamonds I no longer needed Miles to buy. He had called me weak once. But power has a strange way of changing the definition of strength. And I was stronger than ever. Not because I'd buried them, but because I'd smiled while doing it. Time doesn't heal all wounds. But it does bury the ones who caused them. The news of Sophie's sentencing came with no fanfare. No protests. No defenders. The headlines were brief. Former assistant sentenced for attempted murder, fraud. Scandal figure Sophie Lane begins 12-year term. Just like that, she disappeared. The woman who once stood behind my husband, beaming with pretend humility, was now a forgotten inmate in a cold, gray cell. Her name reduced to a cautionary tale on corporate gossip blogs. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The silence of her absence was its own reward. Miles, however, lingered. For a year he stayed suspended in time, breathing but barely. Machines kept him alive, but the man himself? Gone. I visited once a week. Never missed a day. I brought flowers, adjusted his pillows, whispered updates into his ear. I told him about the company's growth. About the new client partnerships. About the IPO preparations. And then every time just before I left, I'd lean in close and say, "You lost. Completely. And the best part? I didn't lift a finger to kill you." I don't know if he heard me. But on the 374th day he died. Heart failure. Peaceful, they said. I wore black. I gave a statement. The world saw a widow burying her husband with dignity. Only I knew I'd been preparing for that funeral long before the first flower was laid. Eleanor showed up at my door 2 days later. Her face was tired, hollowed out, all sharp edges dulled by grief. "He was my son," she croaked. "He was my husband," I replied. She lowered herself onto my living room sofa like she still belonged there. "You have to take care of me now." I tilted my head. "Why?" "I'm family. You owe me." I smiled slowly. "No, Eleanor. What I owed was loyalty. And I paid that debt in full." Her lips trembled. "I have nowhere to go. You had a son. A mistress. An empire you thought you could run from the shadows." I stood. "Now you have a suitcase and a one-way car ride to a nursing home outside the city. I've already made the arrangements. You'll have full-time care. And no more interviews." She stared at me like I'd struck her. "Get up," I said softly. "You've run out of crowns to wear." The company thrived. Months passed. Clients returned. Headlines faded. Stocks rose. The Hong Kong IPO launched on a clear Thursday morning, with my signature printed across the prospectus. I rang the opening bell myself. Investors cheered. Reporters wrote think pieces on my remarkable resilience. They called me a symbol of grace under fire. A master of corporate recovery. Phoenix. They didn't know the half of it. Sophie never saw the IPO. From her prison cell, I imagine she tried to keep up, maybe through old colleagues or whatever magazines they allowed behind bars. She never contacted me. I never needed her to. She was buried, rotting in her own decisions. Miles was ashes in an urn his mother couldn't afford to collect. Eleanor lived quietly in a countryside nursing home, her name absent from every press release. Me. I sat in the corner office of the company I built, the company they tried to take from me, sipping jasmine tea from a hand-painted cup and watching the sun fall across the skyline I now owned. Not rented. Not borrowed. Owned. Sometimes I think about the crash. About the first time I died. About how my final breath wasn't fear, it was clarity. In that moment I knew I had loved too much. Trusted too easily. Forgiven too quickly. But rebirth is a funny thing. It doesn't come with fire and glory. It comes in silence. In patience. In watching your enemies implode without ever lifting your hands. I stood before the tall glass wall of my office one final time that week, arms folded, hair tucked behind one ear. The city below buzzed, oblivious to everything I'd lived through, everything I'd lost, and everything I'd regained. And I whispered to the skyline, "What's mine is mine, and no one takes from me twice." The end.